I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
We are Velocities in Music. On this podcast, Tom and I discuss a plethora of topics pertaining to modern music, including artist deep dives and monthly and annual new music wrap-ups. So, today, Tom, it's officially, 2015's officially over.
Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. It's now 2016, but I would like to, I think it'd be good for us to tie the bow on 2015 music.
That sounds nice.
Our last two podcasts ago, we released our favorite albums list of 2015, and we covered a lot of albums. And in that podcast, we actually requested that all of you guys listening out there tell us what your favorite albums from 2015 were, and call us out for any that we overlooked. And you guys did a wonderful job of this. Now, we definitely want to get to, we went through and kind of scanned all the comments and looked for some trends in what you guys were saying, and came up with a short list of albums that we feel like we definitely just missed, for either the podcast wasn't going at the time or we didn't pick up on the album for whatever reason, and we can talk about that in more detail later. So we'll have a short list there, and Tom and I have been calling this podcast the Mentions and Misses podcast, and the Misses is really divided into two parts. The first part is the albums that Velocities in Music, Tom and I just missed, that we didn't have on our list, that you guys did, and fair enough, we need to cover, so we'll do that list. And then also albums that we feel the artists missed, and, big releases we were anticipating this year where they just kind of fell on their face and didn't release a very good album. And then we'll also do honorable mentions as a follow-up to our 2015 favorite albums of the year list. So before we get started on that, just so you guys know, there are ways that you can help support Velocities in Music. First of all, subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcasting device to automatically get our latest podcast episode downloaded and sent to your device every single week. Velocities in Music doesn't want your money or ads. All we want is for you to share Velocities in Music with family or friends whom you feel would benefit from joining in the music discussion we are trying to create. So, Tom, are you ready to discuss the top 5 albums that we just missed, that we just dropped the ball on?
Yeah, let's hit it.
We gotta hold ourselves accountable. I feel like we did a pretty good job. We started the podcast back up in August, really doing the whole Velocities and Music thing again. So we had, the first 8 months of the year, we weren't really participating. And since then, we've been doing the monthly wrap up, so we're covering a lot of albums. So, end of 2016, we're gonna have this huge list of albums that we've covered throughout the year.
Yeah, we'll be much better prepared.
But I feel like this year we certainly weren't able to get everything, and we let a couple slip through the cracks. You guys were awesome and called us out on a few of these, and we'll go through the list now of just really the top 5 that we saw based on your comments. First up on albums that we miss is Chesky with Broken Bone Ballads. Chesky is an American hip-hop musician. He has a very unique sound, and Broken Bone Ballads, admittedly, is my first exposure to Chesky, and I actually hadn't listened to this album until reading the comments on our favorite albums list of 2015. To me, this is really forward-thinking, thought-provoking indie hip-hop. The vocalist has a decent flow and interesting rhymes with lyrics that describe how the subject is dealing with modern society. There are a number of really strong tracks on Broken Bone Ballads. A few even venture away from the traditional hip-hop sound by incorporating more acoustic guitars and auxiliary instruments. I'm really not in love with this record, but I certainly respect the conscious effort that Chesky made to do something fresh.
Paid you a proper wage, so thank you doubly for every sacrifice you made. If we reach the end of days,
another one that we haven't really talked about, but I know a lot of people are really loving, is Bjork's latest album, Volnakura. And this one actually, I think it might have been somewhere on our list. It was somewhere on my list, I know. I ended up liking this album pretty well, but the thing is, I actually had a very interesting experience with this album, and I actually liked it a lot more on first and second listen, and came down on it a little bit.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and the reason for that is I was enamored with the sound. The overall sound aesthetic, Bjork is getting back to her big string and kind of large bass sounds, closer to what she did on Homogenic, really, than anything else she's done, with production by Arca, who also had a standout album in 2015 with Mutant. And so just that big electronic sound with the dramatic strings and Bjork's just buttery vocals, I really liked. I liked the approach. This is also kind of a healing post-breakup album for her, so I like that general energy. But what I found actually diminished for me on subsequent listens was it didn't have as much comeback quality as I was hoping it would have. You know, I don't expect comeback quality after first or second listen anyway, so I was expecting to want to come back to it more once I listened to it 3 or 4 times, and I just didn't. And I think a lot of that is because it doesn't really have the strong hooky choruses that a lot of Bjork stuff has. Now, the problem is that Bjork, you can't consider her to be a traditional pop artist. She doesn't rely on chorus hooks like that. But when I think back to a lot of my favorite Bjork tracks, they have that. They have that element to it. It doesn't mean that you can't still have some free-flowing kind of orchestral movements, but I just need something that really anchors the album, and I didn't feel like Volnicura quite had that. I still ended up liking it quite a bit. I still think it made it maybe into my top 50 or 70 of the year, and I especially like the opening track, Stone Milker, but overall, I actually just think that it could have been a little bit better suited for my tastes.
Following Bjork, another album we missed was Steven Wilson's Hand Cannot Erase. Kind of a dramatic album title for a relatively dramatic sound. This is prog rock at its best, and it's a highly nostalgic sound, as Steven Wilson is one of the founders of prog rock. There are tons of electric guitar soloing over heavy arena drums and huge layered synths and driving bass all over this record. This album's really about making a statement about rock music, and Wilson does this beautifully. He adds a lot of auxiliary instruments in here and there to add some variety. It's prog, so the song structuring is inherently advanced, but even the complexly structured songs have intros and outros that he puts in that help each movement flow into one another seamlessly. This is a very strong record. However, it's nowhere near mind-blowing simply because this isn't anywhere close to original in 2015, and Wilson does very little to push the genre and sound forward. That's okay. It's still a brilliant record, but it will keep me from dubbing this as one of my favorites for the year.
Yeah, that makes sense, and especially considering, like you said, the guy's a strong force in the prog genre from his other solo work.
The prog is strong in him.
Right, from Porcupine Tree. I wouldn't necessarily expect him in 2015 to be redefining things, but just kind of keeping up with what he does best, and I know a lot of people are loving on this album, and I would really encourage that. Next on our list of albums that we've been hearing a lot of buzz about is Father John Misty's I Love You, Honey Bear, a very personal record about Josh Tillman as Father John Misty, falling in love with his wife and all that she has done for him, how she's changed his life. I mean, wow, to dedicate a whole album to your wife. This is really making me look bad. I better
get on that.
I better step up my game here. But this is an album that came out very early in the year and got a lot of buzz right away, a lot of hype, and has throughout the year. And it's one that I listened to several times because I kept coming back to it, trying to find if I was missing something. There were tracks that stood out to me, particularly the track True Affection. I really liked. I like the lyrics. I like the kind of soulful, smooth approach. But what I found is that by the end of the album, I didn't really feel like I wanted to start it again. I didn't really feel pulled back into it. It just, it was enjoyable while it was on, and there must just be something that I'm missing here, Jake, because I think a lot of people, yourself included, are liking this one a lot more than I am.
Yeah, I think I definitely ended up liking this record more than you did. Now, in full disclosure, before we recorded our favorite albums of 2015 list, all I had done is I had screened this record once or twice, listened to a few songs off of it, and I just wasn't impressed by the few tracks that I had heard. So before recording our favorite albums list, this didn't make it onto my favorite albums list because I hadn't given it a thorough listen, because it didn't initially get me. Then I listened to it a full time through, and I was really intrigued by a couple of tracks. And those couple tracks that really intrigued me, made me want to listen to this immediately after one more time. So I actually listened to this 2 times in a row in depth. And I came to the conclusion that this is just a really darn good album. Very, very intentional songwriting. Tillman has this haunting voice, and his lyrics are very sardonic. He has piano and guitar and drums, but the whole thing really runs the instrumental gamut. Tillman also mixes up the album with a handful of ballads mixed in with some of the bigger production songs, and the appeal here is just very subtle, which is why I think, I struggled with this initially. On the surface, this sounds like a pretty generic indie singer-songwriter album, but to me anyways, when you dig at this record, it really, really shines. I personally think that if we were to redo our list, this would definitely show up on our list.
When can we talk with the face instead of using all these strange devices? It seems like you and I need to have a crazy conversation. Wouldn't be that hard.
The last album that you guys really recommended that we definitely check out and talk about here on our podcast was Everything's Get to Heaven. I really get why people are digging this record. It's absolutely brilliantly fun. The sound is an amalgamation of so many different styles. Prog rock songwriting loaded with pop hooks and vocals, and then drizzled with electronic dressings. The sound really, when I describe it like that, it sounds like a complete mess, but overall I think it really works. It's kind of a more intense, upbeat alt-J, especially in the vocals is what I thought of. The thing I struggle with on Get to Heaven is that I'm not sure what it's all for. There's very little emotional appeal, to me anyways, on this record, and that coupled with the lack of edge in any particular facet of the music makes me think I'll get bored of this after a couple of listens. It's neat in the idea department, but they rely way too heavily on the niche factor of mixing so many styles together. So that wraps up our brief, abbreviated list of 5 albums that we just kind of missed out on, I think. And really, I think you guys deserve a shout out. Thank you so much for giving us all the feedback that you did. We got tons of comments on our favorite albums of 2015 YouTube video, and you guys really stuck your neck out there and gave us a bunch of feedback, and we appreciate it. And there was definitely a number of albums that we needed to dig into more and just didn't have an opportunity or just completely missed. So thank you again, because that really gave us a perspective to go back and identify key albums to listen to and talk about. Now, going forward, Tom and I had a number of albums that we wanted to give an honorable mention to. Albums that didn't make the list that we publicized in our favorite albums of 2015 podcast. But we do feel like you guys would get a lot of benefit if you took the time to check out. So we wanted to come up with a brief list, another 5 albums that we think that you guys should just go and check out that maybe weren't on our favorite. We wouldn't consider our most favorite albums of the year, but are definitely intriguing listens that we want to check out. First up on that list is Lanterns on the Lake with their album Beings. Beings is I think it's their 3rd full-length record. This is a indie rock band from the UK, and to me, their sound reminds me a lot of the band Local Natives, but they have a female vocalist. It's moody indie rock, and it's focused around piano and reverb guitars and really loud, bombastic percussion. The albums, or this album is attempting to strike an emotional chord. It depends, and to me, whether or not they pulled it off really depended on the sense of warmth that they established. Overall, I felt like this was a pretty strong album and definitely one that I wanted to come back to. I remember thinking that this one was very rough around the edges.
I agree. And to me, this one is way more about potential. I really enjoyed it, but it's probably not an album I'm going to come back to all the time, but still, I would encourage you to check it out just because I think this will be a lot of people's style. And more so, I just feel like this band could do a little bit more to click as a band, and I'm really looking forward to how that manifests in future projects for them.
Reach my friends, if you will, but it's rude to stare at the ceiling while I beg you.
Next on the list is Death Grips, Ginny Death, the second half of the double album, The Powers That Be.
Hey, that's a double album?
Yeah. Well,
What?
See, here's the confusing thing. And this is why
I'm really confused.
I don't know how to rank this because I see Ginny Death showing up on a lot of people's best of list for 2015, but not as the complete set of The Powers That Be because the first half was released the previous year. So they release them separately, but they're supposed to be a double album. Can you do that? Is there a rule around this? I don't know. I don't know. How are we supposed to consider this?
I think music is slowly going over to the video game model because now you buy a game at the store, you pay $60 for a video game, you get it, and then you have to wait 35 minutes for it to
install updates,
to do an update because they're releasing the game before it's actually finished. So you have to download the DLC. Pretty soon you're going to download the album and then it's going to be we have to download more songs.
We changed the drums on track 3 a little bit.
Yeah,
you're gonna have to download the new version. No, just call it done. Call it done at some point.
Death Grips, this is the first step to musical DLC.
No. Oh, that's a scary thought to me. It's here we re-released Dark Side of the Moon with accordion on every track.
We added so many more synthesizers.
Yeah, that needs to happen. Anyway, with Ginny Death, getting back to the actual music, there are some great tracks on here. I really liked Inanimate Sensation. I really liked On GP. I see On GP showing up on a lot of people's top song lists. That's great, but to me, if it's a double album, you got to take it in context with that first half. So I think of it as The Powers That Be. I don't think of it as Disc 1 or Disc 2 or Ginny Death or whatever the hell you want to call it. I just think of it as The Powers That Be. And as a double album, I think that it was good. I think it had some highlight tracks featuring Bjork as well, of course, with her vocals on there since she's a big Death Grips fan. Kind of funny. But it was a little self-indulgent. What do you expect from these guys? I don't think it was as strong as Government Plates or, of course, The Money Store, but definitely worth checking out. And, now that it's 2016, the whole release thing doesn't even matter anymore. Just listen to it to enjoy it and listen to both halves. Another one, Jake, that we kind of got ripped apart for not including higher on our list is Joanna Newsom's new album, Divers. And Joanna Newsom is undeniably a great artist. I mean, the scope of her work is very unique, very sprawling. She's only put out 4 records, but they're all extremely ambitious, and her main instrument is the harp. You don't really get that a lot these days. I think that Divers was a worthy addition to her catalog and a good album overall, but I mean, come on, guys. It's good, but is it really that good? Is it really best album of 2015 good? I know that some of you are saying so, and that I'm glad that you're loving it. But after several listens for me, it's more about that charm and it's more about the mood. It's not something that really captivates me even as much as some of her previous work has.
Tom, I think both you and I liked that record enough, but just not enough to put it on our final, favorite albums list.
Right.
Next up on our list of albums we wanted to give an honorable mention to that did not make our favorite albums list is SleaterKinney's No Cities to Love. This album was remarkably solid. However, to me, it wasn't anything that was mind-blowing or cutting-edge original. There's just tons of great energy in the songwriting, a collection of great upbeat indie rock songs. The sound is primarily comprised of just driving bass lines, crunchy, distorted guitars, and rocking drums. Carrie Brownstein's vocals are awesome and mirror the energy of the song, and I think that's really the selling point of No Cities to Love, especially the title track. I just found to be fantastic.
Yeah, I completely agree. Carrie Brownstein's commitment to her vocal performance, I mean, she sells it. But you are right. This isn't anything that other bands or SleaterKinney haven't done before.
Right.
They've accomplished this before, but still, after somewhat of a hiatus, it is great to hear some new material from them, and it certainly didn't disappoint.
We never really checked, we never checked the price tag. When the cost comes in, it's gonna be high. We love a bargain.
Lastly, on our honorable mentions list for 2015 is Elder with their album Lore. This is a metal band. This is, somewhere along the lines of sludge metal or progressive metal, two monikers that we've used to describe band Baroness. In fact, I would say if you're a fan of Baroness, definitely check out Elder. But the big difference here is that the first thing you'll see when you look at the track listing for this album is there's only 5 tracks, and they are long and they are very progressive, horizontally speaking, in terms of the song structures, the formats, what they go through. But the general sound, their production is spot on for this style. It's not overly sharp. It's a little muddy, but still good definitions between the guitar lines, the vocals, the drums. It really creates a very warm kind of metal feeling rather than the kind of cold or jabbing, like isolated sounds that you can get in some modern metal. This is really just a kind of a comforting metal album to listen to. It's a lot of fun, great writing, great performances.
A lot of fun is exactly how I would describe it. I absolutely love the track compendium. That was it was on my list, probably not in the top part of my list, but I definitely really like that track from 2015. So those 5 albums, Lanterns on the Lake, Death Grips, Joanna Newsom, SleaterKinney, and Elder, really represented the top honorable mentions we wanted to give out there. Just albums that we thought deserved a little bit of time for Tom and I to give you guys our thoughts on those albums, even though they didn't make our favorite albums of the year list. Definitely go check those out. Those would probably be probably within the next 5 to 10 albums on our list. Now, Tom, we always do these best of lists at the end of the year. We've been doing this for a long time now, 6 years, 5-6 years. And as we get into the end of the year, we're always talking about our favorites. But what about the albums that we just hated? What about the albums that were just true disappointments, where the artist just completely dropped the ball and missed delivering a good record? I feel like we owe our listeners some time to talk trash about some artists that release some pretty crappy albums.
It's a cathartic exercise.
It is. It's the airing of grievances in the Festivus celebration of the end of the year music list.
That is correct.
And I feel like I want to give a disclaimer because we're gonna trash. We got 3 lists of 5 here today. Mm-hmm. We're gonna trash on a couple albums here that I think I know a lot of people that I've talked to about these already, not on Velocities and Music, but just in general conversation, have vehemently disagreed with me on my opinions.
Yes.
And that's okay. That's what this is all about. It's okay to disagree. But I'm a big fan of most of these bands that we're going to talk about. And just general disclaimer is this is just opinion. And no, that's about it.
All right. Well, we're going to kick it off with Coldplay's new album that came out just a few weeks ago, A Head Full of Dreams. This is a head full of bullshit. I hate this album. This album is trash. I can't stand it. I listened through it, and I don't know what happened to this band. I don't know if I can even call it a disappointment because I don't know what to expect from this band anymore. I'm a freaking fool for expecting anything more than this. Maybe it's because, their first 4 albums I actually liked pretty well, especially Parachutes and Viva La Vida are 2 of my favorites. I know a lot of people prefer Russia Blood to the Head. I thought that album was good too. And then everything just went south. Everything, and Head Full of Dreams, I mean, this thing makes Milo Xylodo look good, and that album was pretty bad to begin with. So first question on this one, Jake. Do they still have a drummer and a bass player?
If they do, they don't need them anymore.
No, they're sleeping in the next room doing crossword puzzles.
They're just there for, to be eye candy on stage, I think.
I guess.
The other thing that bothers me is, well, first of all, like, Ghost Stories came out in 2014. It was like mid-2014 when that album came out. And overall, like, that album wasn't terrible. It wasn't good by any means.
Of their last 3, it's the best one.
Yeah, I'd say it's a relatively average record. But then, just a year later, coming out with, a year and a half later, coming out with another album, when it usually takes these guys, 3 years or so to put together an album. Yeah. I kind of had a feeling that this wasn't going to be very good. The other thing is, like, the main single from Ghost Stories was A Sky Full of Stars, and then this one's called A Head Full of Dreams. Like, very similar titles
They're
there.
clearly running out of ideas. And this is an album too where just listen to it and the producer is clearly doing more work than the band is.
Yes, and Coldplay have always been formulaic from the very beginning. Parachute seemed like pure genius to everyone, and probably even surprised the band themselves, and how much critical acclaim and success that they achieved from that album. But then they tried to replicate and expand upon that while still staying within that formula for the next several records. They've always been formulaic, and so what they're trying to do is they've reached superstardom levels here.
Yeah.
They're selling out, huge arenas for their live shows, which are mostly visual productions and not anything about the musical performance. And I guess that's okay, but I still think you need to back it up by releasing good records.
You do, and I don't know what's going on behind the scenes or in their bank accounts or what have you, but to me, the height of their fame was around the release of Viva La Vida. A lot of people even started to, I'm not alone in the fact that I started to get disappointed around the time Milo Xyloto came out. They were already about as big as you could get when they were still releasing good music.
Right.
So why did they start making this crap? I don't get it. I don't know where the incentive is. I don't know how they can possibly listen to this garbage and go back and listen to their debut and even think that this stuff is worth making.
I mean, when I listen to A Head Full of Dreams, I get the sense that it's not about the music, it's about the paycheck. It's about the fame. It's about the corporate side of this. It's about moving money. That's what it is, and it's just a bastardization of music in general, and it's unacceptable in my mind. And I'll push my glasses up and go back into my corner. Next up on albums that we feel just missed the boat is the Decemberists' 7th studio album, What a Terrible World, What a Beautiful World. Now, last week, and on our favorite songs of 2015 podcast, I noted that a beginning song, the closing track of What a Terrible World, What a Beautiful World, was one of my favorite songs of 2015, and it is. Going from there, that was probably the only song I really liked on this record. Now, I want to say this. I am, in full disclosure, a Decemberist fanboy. My favorite record of theirs has to be Castaways and Cutouts, their first album, followed by Hazards of Love, which came out in, I think, 2009, 2008, 2009, and it was their giant rock opera that they put together, but they've had a number of other very good albums. In 2011, they released The King is Dead, which was it was a major scale back in sound. The songs were more alt country and folk oriented than the craziness of the indie creative side that you really saw in their first few records. And the lyrics took a step back too. And in general, I don't think fans liked that record very much, but What a Terrible World, What a Beautiful World really is in the same vein, both in the production style, in the attitude, in the songwriting, as The King is Dead. And yet people are really, I think, liking this more than I expected them to.
So the thing that bothered me about this album, and to give a little bit of background on my experience with this band, Jake, I know I don't like them quite as much as you. You're a big fan of theirs.
I'm a huge fan.
I do. I love Castaways and Cutouts, and actually I really like The Crane Wife,
Picaresque.
and Hazards of Love and Picaresque as well. Her Majesty's all right.
It's okay.
And then The King is Dead I like pretty well. More than anything, the first track from that album, Don't Carry at All, I find to actually be pretty moving.
Yes.
Which is saying something, because I'll say Decemberist music is not something I find to be particularly moving.
Right.
And a lot of that comes from Colin Meloy's performance, which is also what makes them a unique band. Colin Meloy is a very unique frontman. His lyrical stylings, his vocal inflections, they're very interesting, but I don't think they make for a very emotive performance. The guy, even when he's trying to sing the most meaningful lyrics he's ever written, they end up coming off like a Shakespeare in the Woods performance. They don't come off he doesn't get enough grit and soul, and I like those kind of imperfections in singers. I just do. That's my style. So, the reason I liked Hazards of Love a lot is because he brings in other vocalists. He does that emotional connection more through the narrative and the storytelling aspects. On this album, I feel like with just the album title even, What a Terrible World, What a Beautiful World, I feel like he's trying to hit that level of depth, but his style just doesn't really, it doesn't allow for it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm going to give the Decemberists credit. The way they begin and end this record is genius, and it shows that the band has this innate creativity and charm, which has led them to success on all their previous records. The music that lies between those two bookends, though, really disappointed me. What I hear is slow, repeated acoustic guitar chords and melodies that coat every single track. And Tom, exactly as you were saying, Colin Meloy's vocals, which have never been very intriguing, have lost whatever pizzazz they once had, probably due to the simplistic song structures and reused vocal melodies. I mean, he's just rehashing it on every single song. The lyrics feel really tired. They're playing it far more safe lyrically than they did on any previous record. While the band may stumble on a good melody here and there, when they did, they realized it. Now to desperation, they beat it to death by repeating it over and over until it was no longer enjoyable. And this happens on a number of tracks. This album is a smorgasbord of drivel, bland indie folk tunes. It sounds forced, it sounds ingenuine, and the Decemberists only achieve success by establishing an authentic identity. Otherwise, their whole shtick is just a gimmick. And this album really edges towards just being a gimmick far too often.
And the rain falls on the wrong year, and it won't leave you alone. It won't leave you alone.
Next on our list of albums that really missed the mark for us in 2015 is Tame Impala with their new album Currents. So this is a pretty controversial pick because a lot of people were loving this. It's actually showing up at the top of a lot of lists. And you know what? God bless Kevin Parker for making an album that's divisive because, you know, we need that. We need talking points in 2015, things for people to disagree on. It's healthy.
Yeah.
What's wrong with this one for me is, so first off, I'm not just going to use the cliche criticism of, oh, he went electronic. How could he do such a thing?
He did, though.
Well, he totally did. But the thing is, that's a complaint that we make a lot, Jake. And I feel like we have to get more specific than that.
I agree.
Because we like a lot of electronic music. You know, there was a lot of stuff high up on our list for 2015 that had a lot of electronic
Even our
elements.
favorite record, Blur, even went more electronic on this record.
Absolutely. Even Father John Misty, which we just included in our honorable mentions, you know, said that we really liked. That one had a lot of electronic elements along with kind of the more folksy acoustic stuff. So the problem that I have with Tame Impala's album Currents is not that he changed the sound. It's that he changed the instrumental palette without changing the songwriting to match it. That is a huge just black mark in my book.
I completely agree with you.
So, you know, bands change their sound all the time. This is a comparison that we've done to death, Jake, but I'm going to keep doing it to death. Oh, that sounds bad. And that's the Radiohead Kid A comparison. They took a left turn. They made a very strong change in their sound, went primarily electronic, but they also changed their entire approach to songwriting and song construction to match the sound palette and the mood that they were going for. I feel like what Kevin Parker did with Tame Impala's Currents is he took the same kind of songwriting approach that he's always done, and he just said, you know what, I'm going to swap this guitar out for an analog synth. And he even had synths on his other albums. You know, we heard it on Lonerism, but it worked. And it was with the rest of the instruments that actually complemented it. Here, it's just like, oh, hear that part right there? Well, instead of this like crappy kind of lo-fi R&B approach, just throw in a frickin' guitar. If it's what your strength is, then play to your strength.
Well, plus, if they did that, it would add a little bit of edge. And everything you say, I totally agree with. And I think the result of all that is that they just sound like they've lost that driving edge that made Lonerism so formidable and likable. To me, this record really didn't have a lot to grasp onto. None of the songs seemed particularly intriguing and often sounded tired and forced for exactly the reasons you said. Let's continue the airing of grievances, Tom.
All right.
Next up, Grimes' Art Angels. another very controversial album
Yeah.
to trash on.
A lot of people loving it. It's showing up at the top of lists, man.
Really, let's be honest. We are probably the only people who don't like this album in the whole world.
It's true.
And it's kind of sad too, because we really liked her third record, which came out a few years ago.
Visions.
Yeah, I mean, like, I remember just loving that thing, just tearing it apart and just loving every single second of it. And then, so I was really looking forward to Art Angels. I thought it was going to be great. And then I get it, I put it on, and I'm just kind of disappointed all the way around.
Yeah, the thing had like a 90 on Metacritic when it came out, and everyone's loving it, and I just don't get it. This is one of those Mugatu moments for me. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills, man. I don't understand what the hype is about. I listened to this several times, got to know the tracks, and I still just think that Visions is significantly better. Now, I think I even liked this album a little bit more than you, Jake, overall. And in particular, the track Kill V Maim is one of my favorite tracks of the year. Didn't show up on our list because Jake hated it.
Yes, yeah, it actually was supposed to be, just with the way that we did our spreadsheet magic to make our combined list. It actually did show up on our list, but then we were looking at getting some more variety in there, and so we actually removed this one just because I felt like that track was terrible.
Yeah.
Because I felt like Grimes, she kind of relied on some really terrible gimmicks in her vocals to make that song catchy.
Yeah, she's kind of trying to sound out there and unique, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it just sounds forced.
Yeah.
And it's something that, if the songs are just good enough as they are, then you don't need things like that. But more just, I just kind of felt like this album was a little bland. I listened through it, and it's a lot of the same sounds. I don't really feel like there's a lot pulling me into it. I came away from it very unimpressed.
Yeah, and another thing that I would point out too is that I think that I think this is pretty much true from any perspective, but to me, these songs, some of them stood out, and others were just not as good as the standout tracks. Like that just everyone I've talked to about it is willing to admit that, and so I'm curious your guys' thoughts if you had that same experience too. And I always struggle with albums that I don't feel are pretty consistent throughout, or at least have like tracks that build off of one another. Here, it was more of just a compilation of Grimes tracks, of her trying to expand her craft that she's established on previous records and really push into a new area. But that area that she's going is this poppy, oversaturated, stuff that you hear on the radio, and I just can't get behind it. A lot of this just did not resonate at all with me.
Last on our list of misses is Death Cab for Cutie's Kintsugi.
I've been looking forward to talking about this with you, Tom, for quite some time.
So I looked back at my notes, and this album came out pretty early on in the year, and the notes that I left in our spreadsheet, Jake, when I listened to this album for the first time was just simply, this is boring adult contemporary garbage. That's all I had to say about it. Now, we'll get into a little bit more detail on why I think that, but man, I just feel like this band is sounding so uninspired these days. I don't feel like Ben Gibbard is packing any kind of meaning or emotion into his vocal performances. Even if he was in the performances, I don't think that the writing is there to back it up. It just, with a sound like this that is so sterile and so clean, you can't get any heart into it, and I just don't hear any coming out of these tracks.
Here's the deal. It is very clear that these guys actually are trying to make a solid record. They were trying very hard. In 2011, with Codes and Keys, they tried hard on that record too. This time around, they actually went out to the free agent market and signed a new producer. And Chris Walla is leaving the band, though he did contribute throughout the rest of this album, but I don't think he's going to be part of this band anymore. And he produced some of their older records. And I think Chris Walla actually does a good job. He's produced a number of other albums for other artists as well. So that's kind of sad to see he's going, but they brought in this other producer, which I think attributes to that clean sound you were talking about, Tom. A lot of the traditional sonic motifs we are familiar with Death Cab using are here. There's lots of poppy songs with heartfelt electric guitar hooks, uninteresting yet stable bass and drums, and Ben Gibbard's shy, delicate vocals carooning out his familiar brand of wry lyrics. What's new in this is what Tom you were talking about. What's new is the production is fuller. It's way more polished.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of electronic flourishes to spice up the listen a bit. Personally, I didn't like that. I think it just brings the new wave aspects out of their sound without adding anything original. But what really troubles this album, what really drags it into its grave, is how goddamn slow the beats are and how Ben Gibbard's lyrics are truly heartfelt and endearing, yet he puts absolutely no dynamics or passion into his performance. And he is the most flaccid excuse for a frontman in indie rock that indie rock has ever seen. This record is like a heartbroken grandma in a nursing home. She's really sweet, but the brightness and wit have faded, and all we can do is count down the days until the inevitable ending is over with.
Oh, wow. So when's that going to come? After the next album?
You know, I think
5 more albums?
I think with Chris Walla leaving, they should just pack it up.
You know, I would love to hear Ben Gibbard even do some more solo stuff. Keep it a little more organic, down to earth. That could actually even be good. I just feel like the Death Cab for Cutie name is just weighing them down, and they're just beating a dead horse at this point.
I don't know if that would honestly make it better, because Ben Gibbard just doesn't have it anymore. He's proven that he doesn't have it anymore. He doesn't emote at all in his voice. Well, and he used to. Like, you go back and you listen to the first 4 Death Cab for Cutie albums, and by transatlanticism, he's starting to wane. He's starting to not give the emotional flourish that you hear in some of the other records. But you go back and listen to We Have the Facts and We're Voting Yes, and you can hear the pain in his voice. It's different. And I think that, production style, or back in those days, the lo-fi lack of production, I think only enhanced his vocals.
It did. And actually, it's very similar to what we're seeing happen with Coldplay, I think.
Yes.
Is bands that started out very genuine with the intention of really telling a story and conveying some thought and emotions. And as those ideas get sapped, as they run out, I'm picturing this like graph in my mind, whereas as you go down in that way, what goes up is you try to compensate for that with just what's considered a clean, well-produced sound. But it takes any originality out of it, any realness out of it. And I think that's what was good about Death Cab for Cutie's earlier work. It didn't need to sound great to be great.
Right.
And now, since they can't write anything that is really incredibly good, they just try to make it sound good because that's the only thing that they can do anymore. And it just makes for such a bland listening experience.
Out of reach when I'm in pursuit. Long-winded, then suddenly mute.
I really do believe that very few bands actually have what it takes to stay a band and release records, more than 4 records and keep their sound fresh. It takes a special kind of mix of personalities and talents to be able to do that. And Death Cab just doesn't have what it takes. And quite honestly, I don't think the Decemberists have what it takes either. Coldplay, they don't have what it takes. It takes a very specific type of artist to be able to do, to be able to keep coming out with new records. And it's sad because like these artists will release these just fantastic albums and then they'll never live up to them because they're literally not capable of doing so. And that's just what it comes down to. And I think that I'd like to see some of these artists go out while they're on top. That's one thing I really appreciated about the White Stripes. Is
I was thinking the same thing, man.
Before they started releasing a bad record, Icky Thump, they said, okay, this is still a good record. We're just going to hang up our hat.
Yeah, this is all there is to be done with this project.
Yep.
Let's move on to something else. I respect that, where you know where to draw the line.
And I hate to say this, but Radiohead has finished recording their next album, probably going to drop in the early part of 2016. And I got to tell you, I'm scared shitless right now. I'm scared shitless that they will release a bad record. It hasn't happened yet. I do feel like King of Limbs was a step down, but I'm worried it's going to be bad.
Yeah, I liked the King of Limbs still.
I did too, but it's a step down.
But it also it's getting to the point where Radiohead is sounding so so down on themselves and so negative in their own music that it's getting difficult to listen to. I would like, even though I know you like In Rainbows a lot more than I do, Jake, I would love to hear them
I
do
love
something closer to In Rainbows, because In Rainbows at least sounded like it celebrated their music achievements and built on top of it,
Yes.
rather than just being nihilistic about it. I think that's where they're headed. So if I hear more just kind of like Tom York sounding down on himself and whining over electronic beats, and honestly, that's more a reference to Atoms for Peace than it is his solo work. Actually, Tomorrow's Modern Boxes, maybe that kind of fits into, but I did like the Eraser. But we'll see what happens there. Unfortunately, we still have bands like Blur and Beck coming out with albums that are keeping it fresh, but it's really a damn shame that more people aren't going to get into the new Blur record, but are probably going to be chomping at the bit for the new Radiohead album. Hopefully it's good. We'll see.
Right. So that wraps up our quick list of 5 bands who released an album in 2015 that we just feel missed the mark. We also talked about 5 honorable mention albums, and then just 5 albums that you guys called us out on for that we needed to talk about and discuss on this podcast. So thanks again for your comments there. Tom, I did want to ask you, since we're kind of closing the book on 2015, we're going to put it behind us. We're going to look forward to 2016 and all the great new music that's going to come out. So reflecting back on 2015 one last time, do you feel like it was a good year in music? You always talk about how like you have those key years in music that just like blow your mind. 1986, 1994. Is 2015 one of those?
I don't think it is. When I look back, I think 2009 was stronger. I think 2012 was stronger. 2015, was all right. I think that my top like 3 to 5 albums are really great, but what makes a year really stand out to me is when it can have albums of several different genres come out that are just like classic to me. Yep. For me, Deaf Heaven, Kendrick Lamar, Blur, terrific. Of course, I really liked Braids. I really liked Sufjan Stevens. Yeah. But to be perfectly honest, even those might be albums that I don't come back to quite as much. So I still think it was good. Every single year that we have been doing this, Jake, at least 1 or 2 albums have come out that end up being some of my favorite albums. Right. And there's just something to be said about the artistic ability of our species to be able to perpetually do that year after year. But still, you weigh one year against another, and I think some are just naturally going to be better than others, just statistically speaking, based on your tastes and some. I'd be interested to hear what everyone listening to this thinks about 2015. If you agree with me, maybe you were a little more optimistic about 2015, enjoyed it more overall. I think there were some highlights of quality, but in quantity, I didn't quite get as much.
I completely agree. That's a great question for you guys. And another question I would ask is, what band are you excited for their next album to drop in 2016?
Deftones.
That would be good, wouldn't it? That would be good.
Yeah.
And like I said, I'm kind of dreading Radiohead. Yeah. I'm not looking forward to it because I'm just so worried they're going to fall off the cliff.
We'll see what happens.
I'm interested to hear what you guys think. Please leave us a comment. And as we always say at the end of every podcast, thank you guys for your continued support and participation. Tom and I love all of your comments on our YouTube videos, Facebook messages, and emails. Even if we don't reply to them all, I promise you, we read them and they mean so much to us. Your participation is what makes Velocities in Music possible. So as we always say, thank you for being awesome. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
Thanks for a great 2015. We are Velocities in Music, moving music discussion forward.